Please. Hello there and welcome to the Drax Files Radio Hour. My name is Draxtor, and I'm delighted to have today here in the virtual reality studio in Sansa at 114 Harvest an author that I come to love. Ken Liu is my guest today, author of epic fantasy, author of wonderful short fiction, and also the translator of some of the most important contemporary Chinese science fiction. And we'll talk about all of it. I hope that the internet doesn't go the way of toilet paper at Costco. I'm sorry, that was a cheap joke. Hello, Ken, how are you?
Hi, Drax. Hi, everyone. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
And how do you feel in VR? Let's put the camera here right onto you. Look at you. You look splendid.
Well, thank you. So this is a very interesting experience. So I've been a VR enthusiast for a while, but I have to admit, this is the very first time I've done an event like this.
Right. And does it feel strange with your embodiment because you just, I think you got this avatar today and you saw pictures of it?
No, it feels pretty normal. You get into it, and then after a couple of minutes, you feel very immersed. It feels like we're actually right in the studio together and just chatting.
But how about this uncanny valley thing? I know you're not looking at yourself. I'm looking at you, and behind you, the audience sees a real-life interview that I pulled from YouTube with you. If you turn around, you'll see it too. But this whole uncanny valley thing, which means that an avatar or a digital embodiment is close to reality, but not the real thing, and that there's a lot of research out there that really, really creeps people out.
I don't think in actual experience it bothers me that much. I feel that it's one of those things that you learn to ignore after a little while. I'm sure that if you're having a very close conversation where facial expressions matter a lot, I'm not sure we're totally at the point where that's natural just yet. But
you wait until you see the video. I'm looking at the camera now. I'm looking at the monitor. Your facial expressions are amazing.
Well, there are.
Uh-oh. We have a little glitch
to emote with your voice. So I think it all actually works pretty well. I can certainly say that it's working a lot better than I imagined.
Well, you imagined a lot of awesome stuff. So the hidden girl, let me grab it. I'll try this every show, and it always falls down. Here it is. Oh, it worked this time. The Hidden Girl
Beautiful.
is out now, and it has 19 stories. Here's another one. Oh, look how many I got. Got so many advanced review copies. Simon & Schuster, come on, I'm going to give them away. But so the Hidden Girl has 19 stories, and you have actually a wonderful foreword in it where you basically say that, this is the power of reading. You put something in front of the reader, and you bring it from you. It comes with the context of your own life story, and it comes with your baggage and with your ideas. But all you can do is you have no guarantee how the reader will basically decode it. And in that foreword also, you say that, and that's what I love about reading, by the way, vis-a-vis audiovisual entertainment. But the other thing is that you wrote in the foreword that you did not consciously weave a thread through all these stories. Now, I see that thread clearly, and you said, like, after that, or your editor said, hey, Ken, this is like, there's like this overarching sort of holistic view. Oh, Ken is disappearing. We have a little issue here, and we'll deal with it as people flood into the virtual worlds because of obviously the real world issue. We probably have an influx and an internet overload. But Ken, what is the thread to you that runs through all these stories, the way you see it?
So to me, there are two threads, if you will, that runs through the whole set of stories. One thread is this whole idea that guides a lot of my fiction, both short and long, which is the notion of stories being the vehicle by which we pass on our most important values. That's become more and more important to me as a
Uh-oh. Please bear with us, folks.
values. It's the idea that we don't learn values as abstract definitions. Rather, we learn them in the form of stories, either stories we learn from actions by individuals we admire in our life, or from literary sources that we absorb, mythological stories that ultimately become part of our core sense of self and meaning. The other thread that runs through the set of stories is the idea of how do we remain human in the face of cataclysmic change? How do we remain actors of conscience when the world is filled with impersonal authority, both in the form of governments, in the form of internet mobs, in the form of corporate platforms on which we are few digital feudal serfs? How do we remain actual actors of individual conscience when the world seems to want to press us into subjects of disembodied impersonal authority? So those are the two threads I see.
Right, and I see here also a big theme. Whoops, where's my camera? Here I am. The big theme here is also, and I want to talk about this too, is the theme of belonging, the cultural belonging. And I know, I didn't do a lot of research about your life story. I do that intentionally. I know that you were born in China. You came to the U.S. I don't know how old you were. I came to the U.S. from Germany. So I'm also an immigrant, but we probably have fundamentally different experiences. But what you wrote about here, this whole theme about like who am I when I come to this other culture? What do I need to retain in order to stay myself, and what do I sort of shed in order to gel with the others, so to speak? And where do I lose myself in the process, or do I? This resonated deeply with me, so we'll talk about that too. I just want to, for the audience, I'm going to throw out a bunch of themes that I think are like really appetizing for the hardcore sci-fi fans. There's a lot about uploading your consciousness into the cloud that's going through your stories as a plot device. There is an amazing story about virtual reality as the empathy machine. And you have a dialogue there where two people on opposite ends of the spectrum argue about if virtual reality can be the empathy machine. This is something that is very dear to my heart. Did a lot of work with Noni de la Peña around virtual Guantanamo and other installations that were supposed to create empathy. And there's a lot of different opinions, is VR able to bring people closer to an issue, care about an issue more, or is it just another gimmick that sort of gets you outraged for a little bit, and then you forget about it? So that's another thing. And a story, Memories of My Mother, which is, I guess, the shortest story, is just amazing. Oh yeah, and Hollywood is making movies. Here it comes, folks. Ken has broken this story. This is journalism. There's a story where Hollywood is making movies basically through artificial intelligence. So I guess this is the only nonfiction story in the collection. But Ken, how about this virtual reality as an empathy machine? I mean, you argue this in your book with these two characters. I would venture to guess that you're somewhere in the middle. But where do you actually stand? And I mean, you if you want to reveal something about the plot, please do. If not, but we're here in VR, in the age of the virus. A lot more people will discover these spaces to overcome social isolation.
But I think it's one of those really complicated issues with actually no real answer. The idea that VR can promote empathy is a very old one, and I think we have some evidence that's conflicting. Sometimes it seems to work better, sometimes not. We've learned a lot about the grammar of VR and how it doesn't work the same as traditional filmmaking or even real space. I mean, for example,
bear with us, folks, the little dropouts.
A character is very empathy inducing, and it gets you to identify with that character. But in VR, when you're placed very close to someone, what you feel is the violation of someone's personal space. So it actually does not have the effect that you would naturally assume it has. And
it's more off-putting that way.
Yeah. And the idea of putting you literally in someone's shoes will allow you to empathize turns out to be not quite as straightforward as we thought would be, because oftentimes this is very similar to what I said in my foreword to the collection. That is, when you come to a literary creation, it's really the joint creation of the author and the reader brings her own baggage and interpretive frameworks. So she has to make sense of the text the author has written in a way that conforms to her worldview and her own experiences. Mm-hmm. And when we embody someone in VR, it turns out that you can't ignore that effect either. So it's not nearly as straightforward as people once thought, that if you just walk in someone's shoes, literally, you will empathize better. It's not literally true. It's complicated. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. As far as how I feel about VR is, I feel VR is a very interesting medium that has not been adequately explored. I feel that what's most exciting right now is we are seeing the birth of a new medium of storytelling, of it's sort of like, the invention of film or the invention of electronic text, hypertext. We don't really know what the potential.
Oops, we're breaking up.
Here is. Mm-hmm. And there are things that we can do that other mediums cannot do, but we just have to figure out how to actually do this in a way that stretches what it means to tell a good story and to participate in a story.
I actually wanted to quickly mention that Cory Doctorow, who was here, there is a tweet thread, and I think he gave an interview to the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation where he says that actually reading creates empathy. I could not agree more. That reading actually, bottom line is that it creates way more empathy or deeper empathy than VR has. And we had that, what Ken, you're describing, we put out Virtual Guantanamo 12 years ago, and the experience was exactly the same. It was really split. We thought that people would be appalled by sort of the legal issues here, the human rights issues, but about half of the people who visited the virtual Guantanamo experience in Second Life said, what's wrong with it? I mean, these people are terrorists. They don't deserve any better. So end of story. So they brought their framework with them into the experience, and for the most part, they were not really swayed. I mean, they were maybe swayed in then actual meeting other people there and discussing it in real time, but not by the experience itself.
It's one of those things where I think there's a paradox with text, which is, text at the same time is super low resolution because it can actually, when I'm describing to you the Silkpunk airships or future worlds, I cannot possibly give you the kind of visceral experience of what it looks like there, the way high resolution graphics or virtual reality immersion can give you. But on the other hand, there's something about text that is higher resolution than any kind of VR or film or.
Oops.
It's more real than real. So it's paradoxical. On the one hand, text is really bad at doing certain things that you think would be important for creating immersion and empathy. But on the other hand, it seems to be better than any other medium we ever invented to do that. So that's what fascinates me about text as a medium too. It's one of the oldest technologies we have, and it is a technology. Writing is deeply unnatural to us in a way that oral language is not. But at the same time, text is every generation seems to discover new ways of deploying text to tell stories that hasn't been done before, and it's an endlessly fresh medium, and it's fascinating that way.
The folks on the stream will probably see Ken walking back and forth a little bit. The internet today is overloaded. There's no doubt about it, because due to the coronavirus, everybody is staying at home. Schools have also closed in Germany, so please bear with us as the internet is pulled to the tested to its limit. This is interesting as we're here, Ken. Just a quick aside. We talked about it off the air. The whole social isolation part of it, which is also a theme in your book, ostensibly because some people are able to upload themselves into the cloud as sort of disembodied minds, and other people reject that. And in my framework, I read that in sort of a little bit in the framework of some people reject communication through avatars, categorically and ideologically, to be honest, or that's how I see it. While this would, really help us overcome physical limitations. I mean, nobody wants to replace, I guess, physical interaction, but so many stories in this book deals with this embodied interaction. So this is a theme that seems to really kind of haunt you, I guess. You explore it from several different angles. Is being human tied to the body, I guess, is the question that you're asking in many of these stories.
That's right. I think that's a good way to frame it. And I would say that this is actually just a sci-fi or updated version of a very old question that all of us have thought, which ties back to what you said earlier. I as I mentioned earlier, I I'm concerned very much with the whole idea of how do you remain human in the face of cataclysmic change. And I think that's actually not a new question. My stories about uploaded consciousness yourself into a new state of existence really not very different from the idea of migration into a new culture, or all that different from just growing up. I think one of the ways in which I'm a little
actually good, because that is brilliant, Ken. I didn't even see it that way. It's a metaphor for growing up in a way.
Yes, that's exactly right. So I think one of the ways that I'm a little I want to push readers to think about my stories that way, because I think there's a tendency to treat stories about migration or stories about transitioning from one state of existence to another as somehow about very unique experiences, particular experiences, but I don't view them that way. I think these are actually very universal themes, which is, not surprising at all. The more individualistic and the more particular you get, in fact, the more universal you end up becoming, because all of us end up seeing this commonality in our experiences. So growing up is actually very much similar to the idea of migration and to upload into another state of existence, because if you think about it,
goes again.
That world is just gone. You just can't. All of us, especially in the modern world, end up migrating in some sense to a new state of existence. And think about how you used to do research, or how you used to go visit your friends as a 5-year-old, then as a 10-year-old, and then as a 19-year-old versus later. Every single stage you transition tremendously, and you can no longer do the things you used to do. You have to learn a whole new set of rules, a whole new culture, a whole new way of doing things. All of us are actually migrating constantly through time at the rate of 1 second per second, and we just don't think about that. We sort of accept it as part of common human experience. But one of the things about sci-fi is, by positing this experience and projecting it into something unique, so experiencing in a new light, and try to see how what you've been taking for granted actually is something extraordinary. And I want you to sort of see that extraordinary part of everybody's existence.
Mm-hmm. This is wonderfully put. And as we have uploaded ourselves here again into VR, it's funny to hear you, and we hear you clearly. I hope my audio is good for you too, Ken. And sometimes you cut out, and then your avatar hops slightly to the left and to the right, and then you come back in. So, but that's all good. I mean, that is adding a little bit of the surreality. This is so well put. Ken, a book that I'm reading now in preparation for an interview with Joanne McNeil next Wednesday. She wrote a book called Lurking, where she puts in the first chapter, she explains her experience about and all of our experience with internet search. And she was looking for something for a TV commercial that she remembered when she grew up, and nobody had uploaded it into YouTube and Google. It wasn't indexed in Google, so it's gone. And so she sort of riffs on the fact that today, where we are so dependent, and not only dependent and reliant, but also assume that if it's not on Google, it never happened. She riffs about the fact that can cause a mini identity crisis. Did this actually happen? Did I see this commercial on TV when I was 5, or did I just dream about it? That's another interesting side effect of technology.
Yeah, I talk about that and think about those issues all the time. A lot of my stories are concerned with the whole idea of, what does it mean to have something be true? What does it mean to have memory in the age of digitized, cyborg existence? Because all of us are cyborgs now to one degree or another. Think about how much you think actually you don't actually know. When I was a lawyer, it's natural to think that as a lawyer you gain lots of specialized knowledge, but it turns out that what any of these forms from scratch without using forms that existed. I couldn't do many of the things that I did every day without looking up constantly cases and statutes and specific citations. I can't call my parents or my friends or anybody else without my phone. I don't know their phone numbers. It turns out that all of us have externalized so much of our memory in digital form that if all that stuff is lost, you just end up feeling like you've literally lost a part of your brain and your identity. You don't know who you are.
Right.
Some of this is again as old as the human race, or as the history of technology. The idea that you don't actually know what you think you know because of technology is an old theme raised by Plato and Socrates. And they were raising it about writing. There was this whole discussion about how writing is a kind of false kind of knowledge. You think you know something, but you in fact do not know it. You merely know where to find it. But that's how all of us are, and we now have to think about what to do. And I think the other thing I want to emphasize here is a lot of what I talk about in terms of transition, of growing up, of uploading to a
Yeah.
both the things you lose and the things you gain. I think all too often these stories emphasize merely what is lost. You don't have face-to-face interactions, so you lose a lot. You don't have a physical body anymore, so you lose a lot of our cognition as embodied, evolved intelligences. You don't have the experience of mortality anymore, so now you've lost the basis for human motivation, so on and so forth. And I do take all of those very seriously, and they do become part of the story. But I emphasize just as much the other end of it, which is you gain a ton of things. I would rephrase what you said earlier a little bit differently. I think when we're growing up, and when we're transitioning to a new state of existence or migrating across borders, it is often tempting for us to tell these stories as stories of nostalgia, of saying, wow, how much we've lost, how much of myself I have to give up and shed in order to become somebody new. My stories tend to not take that approach, or at least use that as merely one aspect of it. My stories tend to tell the story from the opposite end, which is, how much do you not have to give up, and how much are you gaining? And how do you actually take the parts that you thought had to be shed and just reinterpret it so that they become part of the new? I have a story in there called Ghost Days, which is very much about how our sense of self is built on the past, and how it's not about discarding the past. It never is. I don't think discarding the past makes any sense. I think what you do is you reinterpret it and reincorporate it into the future and the present, and that's how you make sense and make everything old new again.
And in Ghost Days, just real quick, just a quick summary. Ghost Days is happening in the very, very far future on a different planet. It's happening in the 80s, and then it's happening in, and forgive me, what the dynasty was in the 8th century, I guess. Could that be, or the 10th century?
Some of the stories are right. You were cutting out just a little bit, Drax, so I didn't hear it. But go ahead.
The Ghost Days connects it with an artifact that is brought that travels through time, not literally but metaphorically, and the people there is a clash of civilizations. I think a little bit. It's almost like what's happening today. Some of the older folks there say, you got to learn it this way. You got to adhere to the culture like this, and the young folks reject that. I mean, I'm simplifying. There's a lot in that Ghost Day story, but it resonates so much to today, or my own discussions with my father, to be frank.
We all have those. Exactly. And I think what I sort of do there that is, to me, very uniquely me, is I don't present those as necessarily irreconcilable
Right.
conflicts. My
Right.
point has always been that you always end up having to figure out how to take the new and push them forward into take the old and push them forward into the new. It's always about how you reinterpret the past. It's never about abandoning or rejecting it. I think like the whole idea of rejecting the past to move forward is flawed, deeply flawed. We never do that. We have to always new as we go forward.
There, Ken was cutting out, and I was interacting with the YouTube audience here for a sec. Folks, we are going to, this is, by the way, if you're just tuning in, I'm talking to Ken Liu, his book, The Hidden Girl Short Story Collection, 19 Stories. Here's another one that fell down. Here it is. It keeps falling down. Because they're too good, they're too heavy. They're so heavy with themes that the gravity literally pulls them down, even in virtual reality. But yeah, it's a magnificent short story collection. And Ken, of course, also wrote. The funny thing is, one of the characters in the first story is called Ona, and then you of course have Dara, the islands of Dara. Those are both sisters of my wife, Ona and Dara, and the third sister of my wife. Her name is Rini. So if you start writing about Rini, I'll get really freaked out.
There you go. It's connections everywhere. It's connections all the way down.
So we're going to, in a few minutes, I want to hop around a little bit, want to see if people are actually hanging out at the watch party, and then we're going to go to a few places. I hope that the audio is okay. Yeah, the YouTube, I get feedback from the YouTube folks. They say the audio is good. Thank you. What was it? Oh yeah. So yeah, you put it, you put it brilliantly about this forgetting, and the last story is a very short story that I think the quote is, "We have to remember to forget," or I'm paraphrasing, but the last one is really kind of a wonderful closing, and I couldn't agree more with that. But it's interesting when I hear you talk, it seems you are more hopeful about mankind. I mean, I wouldn't call myself a pessimist, but every sci-fi author that comes here that sometimes writes really heavy-duty stuff that I very much enjoy, they seem to be more hopeful. Ken, what's up with that? I mean, you put themes out there. You work in your head deeply with themes that are dark, but you come out hopeful. What's the magic here?
I think that's actually true of a lot of writers. I often hear people talk about my stories and say that I'm writing about dystopias, and I don't think I quite agree with that because I that's not how I see what I do. I think what I'm doing is I take reality and I twist it a little bit, either through fantasy or sci-fi, so that you end up seeing highlights of aspects you might loaded consciousnesses and migration, to really talk about universal themes of the sense of change as you're simply growing up, as you simply learn about the world and realize that you've moved yourself into a new world and you cannot return to the old. This is universal. We always do that. But you don't necessarily think about it that way until someone twists it a little bit to highlight that aspect.
Don't you think it's more like for immigrants? And last question before we head out. I actually have two, and then we're going to head out on our field trip. But your immigrant story, I mean, when did you come to the U.S., and how do you think, in your self-analysis and your reflection, how does that influence your writing, or how does it make your writing different from other writers?
I don't think it does.
Oops, cutting out. Oh no. Ken, stop. Don't walk away.
We're sort of moving into new worlds just simply by the act of growing up, by the way the world changes around us. We never the idea that we can live in an unchanging world has never been true, and it's more not true than ever. And so, I emerge hopeful really in a lot of my stories simply because I feel that the human spirit is, in fact, something that deserves to be celebrated. And so my stories often talk about how do people remain individuals of conscience, despite all the forces pressing.
Oops.
I tell these stories to ourselves and become the individual actors of conscience that we want to be. This is a very important thing to me, the idea that our self-narratives determine our sense of meaning and how
that
we
is to
think
me
about
very,
ourselves.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but to me, this is very American. What I found as a German immigrant to America, I found so refreshing that this is a very, I do associate this with America, that you are allowed to reinvent yourself to a larger degree than I would argue today in Germany. I mean, the culture is, is very similar, I would say. I mean, we have neoliberalism all over the world now. Thank you for homogenizing everything. So yeah, there's that, but also there's still a distinct difference between many European countries and America. And I would imagine with China, isn't that the same, or are you allowed to shed the what can be wonderful, but like we were talking about for the last half hour, also big baggage. Are you allowed to shed it like that?
I can't talk about China because, I'm not Chinese. So I feel like only Chinese authors can really speak to that. Although I can say that from what I've seen, every culture's stories contain that element of keeping traditions alive by changing and by moving forward. I don't actually think any cultures are strictly conservative or strictly forward looking. I think they're always internally
Oh no.
worth defending, which many of them are. Those who are deeply embedded in the culture can sense that sense of multitudinous, the idea that there are forces of saying we got to conserve certain things, and then forces saying that we have to move forward. And I feel that's actually very universal. I don't think that's unique to any individual culture.
Mm-hmm.
But I do agree with you that
But
this
hold on,
idea that. Go ahead.
I mean, I know. I was just curious because you said you're not Chinese. So when did you come to America?
I was 11.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
so
interesting. I always wonder because my son was born in America. Now we're in Germany. We might go back in
think
2
about
years. I wonder how he. I always wondered what his cultural identity, how he would call himself. And I
yeah,
don't know.
I feel like that's a very individual thing, and everybody has to come up with their own answers. But my view is that you have to sort of shed labels. I'm very opposed to labels of any sort, and I think that you have to just treat people as individuals and try to figure out what is the story that they find to be deeply meaningful. And for me, the meaningful story is the idea of moving forward by taking the past and giving them new meaning, and preserve the values that matter to you in the stories that you care about, the stories that really move you. And so a lot of I think that the individual human spirit and the way that individuals remain so the fact that individuals can maintain their conscience and to maintain the ability to make moral choices in the face of incredibly impersonal choices, I think that's universal. Whatever identity you wish to craft for yourself. And I feel like, that's the way that all of us end up moving forward.
I couldn't agree more, especially with the resurgence of this really dumb nationalism, especially in Germany. A lot of people sort of evoke the history and they talk about the superior culture in literature. And, I mean, I always say, like, what was the last book you read, I mean, people really just sort of say that, yeah, this culture and our films and our architecture, look at that. Well, did you actually build this? Anyways, I'm getting off a tangent.
No. You're actually not. This is what you said is also really important to me. I actually think preserving the past and preserving traditions is incredibly important.
Yes.
But you have to sort of figure out what it is you're trying to do. So, for example, I take a stance that I think oftentimes people don't understand because it's just not often described. So people often say, "Well, you use a lot of Chinese stories in your stories," and I say, why do you call them Chinese stories? They are stories of mine, and I'm an American. Therefore, by the fact that I'm using them, to be described as Chinese inspired because they're American inspired, because I'm an American, therefore all my stories are American. This stance drives a lot of people nuts. They insist on excluding Chineseness from American identity. And I just want to challenge that, because my point has always been that America has never claimed to be the story belonging to only one group of people. Anybody who joins America can become part of the American chorus, and therefore their stories become American stories. So this is actually one of the very important things I keep on pushing, which is to recenter the idea of Americanness around leaving unchallenged the idea that Americanness can only belong to a certain type of story, and anything else must be therefore excluded as something else.
Thank you so much for putting it this way. We're breaking up a little bit. I could not agree more. And in Germany, the phenomenon is very similar. And we don't have to belabor the point. This sort of clinging to some sort of perceived culture that only belongs to a certain group, and usually excluding immigrants, is a really nasty resurgence of some ideas that need to be really buried, zombie ideas that are terrible. And I see the American model in theory exactly like you do, and you see it in practice a lot too. And that's the promise of America, and it's not dead, and that's wonderful. So these ideas are. Do you hear my audio still kind of okay, or is it a little getting garbled there a little bit?
It's okay. It was breaking up a little bit, but you always come back. I mean, that's why also I remain hopeful, because we may break up a little, but we always come back.
Yeah, well, this is an American company that makes this product, so.
There we go. It's the idea of ever refreshing. Everything can be done when you reboot, so you're totally okay.
We have a few questions here, and then we'll answer them too while we're hopping. Gisela Axel says, like to know where Ken gets his ideas, inspirations from. And Jules Rivera says, writers like to get their boogies out on the page. Ilse says, does Ken think being able to forget we are mortal or being immortal makes us less empathetic? That's a good question. Or do we need to be like that to make it as mankind? So
Sorry, Drax, can you repeat that last question about mortal and immortal? Because you were breaking up in the middle of it.
The way I read this is, Ilse is, I think, asking if, let's say we are immortal, does that make us less or more empathetic?
Wow,
it's almost she read the book.
I know. I think you read the book. Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so let's take those questions in order. Where do I get my ideas? Probably the same way as every other writer, which is
we got to go into the secret box of VHS tapes over there. I'm sorry to say, because we're breaking up too much. It's not going to get better. I know it from experience. This is unfortunately a
Hey, Drax, I'm back.
There we are. Give me 30 seconds. Very good. Sound is great. I need 30 seconds to position the camera, and the folks see an interstitial video. This is super professional today. Oh my God. It's unbelievable.
This is great.
Yeah.
Do you know how many people?
15 people watching. That's pretty good. So let's see here. Let's do a quick camera test. And it's working. Let's bring us back. All right, we're back. We're back in another undisclosed location. So Ilse was asking if the prospect of being immortal, if we stipulate that would be a possibility, does it make us more empathetic or less? What a deep question. Ken, go for it.
It's a real deep question. So let me finish answering the first question of where do writers get their ideas. I do it probably the same as any other writer, which is it depends on basically being inspired by the life you live. My kids. Sometimes it's because my wife noticed something and just said to me a phrase that I can't forget, and I want to build a story around it. from everywhere. Back to the whole empathy immortality thing. I really don't know. I don't think I have a set conclusion. It's one of those things I think a lot about. And a lot of my stories sort of represent the way I try to work out these things for myself by just telling myself a story and going through it and see what happens. I have no doubt that being immortal will make some, and it may have the same kind of, it may have the opposite effect on others. We often have this notion that if you're a human being, how can you have empathy for ants and bugs? But on the other hand, because we're human beings, oftentimes we do actually have a lot of compassion for spiders and other bugs. My daughters they will feel terrible if somehow a little insect got killed in the home, and they're always really good about trying to protect them. And if we don't want them in the house, capturing them and sending them outside. So I think it's one of those.
Tell them I'm almost 50. I still feel that way. Go ahead.
Right. So it's a difficult question. The idea of how immortality would change your humanity, I think it would. There's no doubt. But exactly how, we have no idea. It's again like
pressure of resources. I mean, in your stories, the resources are not that big of a deal, I guess, because
they are actually in my stories. The whole point of human beings uploading is to
save resources.
It's much more expensive to move atoms around and to keep bodies alive than it is to maintain merely.
Oh, yeah. No. That's not what I meant. What I meant was the resource. I mean, it becomes affordable at a certain spot. You're absolutely right. I don't want to misrepresent that. It's a way to save physical resources and all that kind of stuff. But it becomes. Not completely, but it becomes affordable for large parts of the population. So it's not a scenario where only the rich can live in these sort of wonderful jar. Their brains live in golden jars, and the poor people live, I don't know, they're like down there somewhere, 50 brains in one jar or whatever.
Sorry, Drax, you want to repeat the very last part? The audio didn't quite come in.
Well, I was just saying the 1% gets a golden jar, and the lower 99% get 50 brains into like a low-end storage center. It's like
I try to imagine a better future than that, where it's actually democratic uploading in the future. I mean, it didn't start out that way, but that's where I see things going ultimately. Probably too hopeful, but who knows? I'm a hopeful sort of person.
Jules Rivera says in the chat, I wonder if being immortal would make someone into a colossal douche. Well, I think
very possible.
We can all think of a lot of people in our own life and in public life that would fit that description for sure.
Without a doubt, there will be.
Oops, okay, you were cutting out. Okay, now one more before we meet the crowds, because now I want to. It is such a great conversation, and I'll be very mindful of your time. I know you got to go pretty promptly. You have a story about trolling in there, which I find fascinating. There is a terrible event, a shooting, somebody dies, and the mother of the child that gets murdered here goes out and becomes an activist, an anti-gun activist, and she gets trolled. So this is very near future. I mean, this is literally happening right now, and there's some added stuff there that is even more gruesome, and certain sort of troll armor doesn't really work because it's a constant battle between the armor and then the trolls piercing through it. But you tell this in different perspectives, first person, and then the troll also has a little thing where he justifies his conduct, and it's absolutely brilliant. I mean, it's scary, but it makes sense in this twisted mind of that troll. He basically accuses the mother who goes out there and fights for against gun violence of being inauthentic. I mean, it's not an Alex Jones here or just a crisis actor. It's much deeper than that, and it plays into that nihilism that I think drives a lot of the trolls, which I find so depressing, but also not surprising. But yeah, go ahead. How would you describe that story? How did you come up with that?
I think that's a pretty good description you have there. I mean, I think, as I mentioned earlier, the whole idea that we're all each crafting for ourselves a narrative that empowers us, that allows us to become the heroes of our own epic fantasies. I think that's how we derive meaning. But the dark consequence of that view is that, to someone like a troll or just a horrible person who does not, in fact, share empathy with the rest.
No,
Is that they are a hero for in their own epic fantasy of taking on the rest of the world. The media, in their view, is trying to make a profit of tragedy, and the individual victims, in their view, are just seeking attention. It's
they themselves are also victims of this game, though, because all that they can seek or all they think is out there for them is also this kind of media notoriety. I mean, this is what society has sort of brought upon us. There's no other goal than to have your 2 minutes of fame, I guess, for whatever, however you do it.
Connected with everybody else. It's the society where we're connected with everyone else, but we have less empathy than ever. I mean, this is the paradox of the connected world, right? The idea is usually that if you actually have a connection with someone, you ought to be able to feel for them. But the reality is we evolved to form deep connections or deeper connections with really probably a couple hundred people. When we're suddenly connected with everyone else in the world, the way Facebook, wanted to do, and the way Twitter in some way actually does, we suddenly find ourselves
overwhelmed.
We start to lose empathy. I feel that part of the way we end up becoming such horrible versions of ourselves has to do with the scale problem. We just cannot live in the scale where we're expected to be connected to everybody else and to protect ourselves almost. We end up becoming these horrible versions of ourselves. And, a lot of my stories are about, again, how do you resist that? How do you actually work a narrative for yourself out of that state of existence? How do you return humanity and human scaled interaction back into your life when all of the hyper connected, hyper disembodied modernity seems to be pushing you towards the other way? We have a culture in which irony is deeply prized. If you care about something, then you end up losing. So the only way to win is to not care. The less you care, the more trollish you get, and the more likely you are to win an argument. And that's just not the world we want to live in.
Right. And I have to bring this up because, as people know me, I'm very sort of left of the spectrum. I do believe that if we create more equity in the world with fair wages and jobs that are actually meaningful, I think the necessity to troll and find satisfaction out of just destroying someone else will, I think, lessen automatically. I might be very naive, but I truly believe that. I think if there's other things, and that's why I think that social virtual worlds where you can create things, that act of creation is, it might do some good. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there is a death wish. Some people are born to create. Other people are maybe born to destroy. Anyway,
well,
with that very wishy-washy thought.
Drax, I couldn't agree with you more. Your point about the importance of creation and that sense of creation is, to me, very much a dear theme of my work.
Some people would argue that some kids they want to destroy the sandbox.
Well,
they would say it's genetic or what,
I don't want to go down that route because, that way lies madness. But I think all of us are born with an innate desire to derive meaning by creating. And so what you said earlier about having jobs with meaning, I think is very key. So much of our discussion about job creation, about the threat of automation, seems to center around the idea that you have to have jobs without thinking about, are these jobs meaningful? I mean, if jobs are merely a way to deliver income to people, then just have universal basic income. That solves that problem. But if you want jobs to accomplish something more, which is to give people a sense of meaning, of control, of creativity, of ownership, of having made something for themselves, shared some
And
aspect of themselves,
Yeah.
share some aspect of themselves with the world, of actually creating something new. I really think that's actually deeply important to our sense of meaning, of having lived an existence worth living. We're not mere,
delivery machines of income to put roofs over our heads.
are the most basic physiological needs. We need to move up the pyramid, and that sense of self-fulfillment is critical to what it means to be human. And we don't seem to think enough about that in terms of our job creation policies or how we want to organize the world. It cannot be that what we really want is just for everybody to have an assembly line job or a job working in a giant warehouse, following the rules of a smartphone telling us where to go. That cannot possibly be what we're trying to accomplish. And yet, so often when we talk about jobs, that seems to be.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so this is the point actually where I say, please watch Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times from 1915, actually talking exactly about that. Read a little bit of Marx, but we're going to go now. I'm going to run a interstitial video placeholder while we go to the instance of the event where the people hang out. So Ken, if you click your world icon there, if you click the world icon, you can see there's 11 people. Oh my God, there's 11 people in the event. Do you see that event?
I got to confess to you, I'm not sure how I bring up the world menu.
You click on the Oculus, you click your button, it's the Y button that brings up a menu at your wrist.
Let's see.
Click the Y button on your left controller.
Yep, I got it.
And there's a world. The top left icon is a world.
Yep.
And there is a join event. That's the first event. It's live. And there's 11 people. So you go there. It'll take me 3 minutes or so. Mingle with the crowd. I think they have some beverages, maybe. I don't know how that works. Here we are. I'll be there in a few minutes.
I'm going.
For the YouTube folks, we're going to run a quick interstitial, and we'll be right back.
A huge boost to the user numbers for Sensor.
I hope so.
Yep, and there's no way we
Hello.
can pass the virus here.
Yes, exactly. Hi, Drax.
Hey,
Pass
there's
other kinds of viruses.
Hello.
No, I'm just kidding.
Look at all these people.
Are
I
you
know, this is amazing.
are you guys infected at all? Are you having virus problems here? No?
Not
Just don't use
anymore.
my
I had the
headset.
type A flu, but that's over with, so I'm
What?
good.
Okay, well this
You
is
already know that.
I know, but you were at Costco. So this is Ken here, and let me
Yep,
introduce
yep.
you,
Oh my
folks.
god.
Costco.
Oh, so many friends. Here's Mayeki, here's Bluebell, and I don't see names. Here's Space Sailor in the back. Please introduce yourself if I don't recognize you. This is, of course, Zero Cheese. And here's Matthew and Bagnaria. These folks made your avatar.
Yeah, thank you.
hmm You're welcome.
Absolutely last minute stuff. Absolutely awesome.
Right.
Really, really cool that you jumped into, let me actually bring up names here. This is amazing how you put this together in such a short time. So,
Yeah, it really is.
who did I
Drax
miss?
loop.
What could
Oh,
be better?
here is, dude, it's great. Here is Elven Maid. Elven Maid is here, and who is this? This is Eva Paradise.
I think we have a weird problem because I'm hearing an audio loop. Like I'm hearing you
Oh.
from earlier.
Right.
Yo, turn your world audio off.
Right, you have to turn the world audio off. Oh shit, I should
Okay.
have told you this before.
All right, how do I do this?
Go to the settings, click your Y button,
Yep.
go to the fader icon,
That says settings. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Dashes, yeah.
and bring
Okay.
world audio all the way down.
Okay. World audio all the way down.
Yep. Let me check if
Done.
we're good on YouTube. Are we good on YouTube, folks? The YouTube folks, let me know if you hear us good, and if the stream is good. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
So I figured I brought up a few places to visit, and we can keep talking about the themes. So I'm gonna bring up a portal, and Bagnari and Matthew, their company is called Full Spectrum 3D. They make wonderful places, and I know Bagnari is going to slap me. I didn't I didn't choose any of your places. These are places. These are quick places that pertain to what Ken is writing about. So, folks, if again, a big plug, big shout out to Full Spectrum 3D, Medju and Bagnaria. If you're watching this and you're not familiar with Sansa in this community, these guys make amazing content, and please check out their website, fullspectrum3d.com. I would like to go with you guys if you want to join us, or if you want to leave Ken and me alone, um, because you don't want to talk about themes of. Well, actually, does anybody have any questions for Ken? Wow, is the audio dead? Hello?
No, I can hear you.
Oh,
Can
okay.
you
No, this was this was when the biology teacher asked my son, "So, Khalil, would you like to tell us about the chromosomes?" No.
My mic was off. I do.
Oh,
Hey,
please.
man.
Oh, this is Peter Pooper. Hello, Peter Pooper. How are
How's it
you?
going?
Question.
Uh,
Shoot.
I have
Yeah.
a question. Don't you think that UBI would enable more people to explore their creative side?
I think so. I think so. That's always been one of my theories. I don't think it will solve all problems because there will always be structural issues, even UBI world where we have to work that out. But I think it would help. I think it
I do too.
because they're just struggling to survive to have a chance to do so.
Let me
Yeah.
quickly say these little glitches that you see has nothing to do with Sansa. This is a bandwidth issue. I said it before. There's social isolation going on, folks. We have a big influx into VR. The internet is really maxed out today, okay? So before I get hate mail, yeah, Sansa is great, but why is Ken breaking up? Well, the internet is not ready for social isolation. We are though. We are all shut-ins.
Yeah, it's true.
That's a good
What are you
question.
gonna do?
It's a good question. Any other questions, or we can visit and you just chime in and just blurt it out. This is
Well,
not school.
maybe Ken can expand on this. I know that like being a part of these virtual worlds, Second Life and now Sansar, people they get back into creating, and it's a whole
Yes,
different way of looking at making a living, you know,
that's a great.
selling
Yeah.
virtual products and things like that. But I wondered what you thought about it.
I think what you said is exactly right. I mean, I feel like VR represents the potential for a lot of people to be able to create things that would be very hard in the physical world, or they can't do. I mean, I think one of the great things about technology in general is that it allows people to be creative in ways that used to be very expensive and difficult. You know, folks
Mhm.
Don't die, Ken.
getting good enough that that's possible. There are ways to create digital items and have it spread virally around the internet. Distribution wise, there are people who can make a living as independent authors. I mean, these are all ways in which technology has made creativity more accessible and more possible for people. So VR is definitely part of that. That's how I feel.
Do you know, Matthew, do you want to bring up a portal? I'm just afraid that it takes too long to load, but do you guys have your experience live with the animals? I think that that would be wonderful. And we have a
Oh,
lot of
that
people on the
one. Oh,
stream. And, a lot of talk today with the virus today is about, relaxing and trying to sort of deal with the anxiety. I think Trevor Noah from The Daily Show joked about, well, I mean, it could be bad. You could get the
Oh, I watched
virus,
that too.
or it could be worse. You could be stuck with your family for 5 weeks. So,
There you go.
I let Mitchell bring up this portal. We could jump
yep. We
to
could
this
go
place.
here.
This
Yep.
is the animals that Matthew and Bagnaria make, and this is wonderful. This is the animal sanctuary. This should load pretty quickly. So
Okay,
Mhm.
let's
let's
go.
all hop over there. And folks watching this on the YouTube, bear with me if we have again a bandwidth issue. This stuff loads fairly quickly normally, but today is a special day, and I don't have to belabor the point. I don't think. Oh, that was quick. Look at that. I'm gonna bring up the world audio a little bit here.
I think Bagnario was first.
Here we go.
It
So
takes
look at this.
longer
Total
to load
surprise,
on the
right?
server than actually load the world.
How relaxing that could be here. So Ken, how about that? In one of your stories where the mother is first opposed to uploading herself, and then her son stays actually down in the physical realm. Is this something that you envision? Would this cost a lot if I wanted to upload my brain into this environment?
I was imagining that you could upload into an environment in which you can reconfigure the world any way you wished.
Yes.
And you
Actually,
can
this story
certainly have a world like this.
we didn't touch on this one story where the father of the girl is a designer of multidimensional worlds, and she then, through exposure to the physical realm, opts to create something that is more limited. I thought that that was beautiful. She sees the Chrysler building. Her mother flies her over the sort of the remnants of the earth, and her don't run away. This packet loss is hilarious. I'm breaking up, Ken. Am I not?
You're okay. I can
Okay.
hear you just fine.
So I guess the moral of that story is that also what Matthew was talking about with creation, that the limits really make the art. If you have unlimited dimensions, as the father suggests in that story, he can create 24-dimensional rooms and
Right.
whatnot. And his daughter opts, no, I'm going to go for 3 dimensions.
Yes. I think there's something to the idea that art requires some restrictions, some set of rules, simply because it guides your creativity in certain directions, allowing you to.
As an artist, you almost a lot of times you'll restrict yourself.
Yeah.
Yep.
Give yourself boundaries.
Well, but
Apples for myself.
So you said it again, Ken. You were breaking up.
I said that as a writer, sometimes when I'm doing a story.
How do you?
When I'm doing a story.
Yeah, please tell us a little bit about the process. I love these questions.
Yeah, so I was just saying that I would just set myself certain restrictions. For example, I want to write a story that follows a recursive pattern, or I want to write a story which is about courage without ever using the word courage or its synonyms. Those rules are for myself are very helpful, because once you have that rule, you end up. You know how when you go to work and you're always following the same
Same pattern, routine.
the world, and to discover the new is to deliberately take a way that you don't normally go. Set a rule for yourself to not go the way you naturally would go, and that forces you to discover new ways. And it's that to me is a lot of what art is about. You set yourself a rule to say, I'm going to describe the world in the way that is not obvious, that is not the default, and go down that route and see what happens.
Do you write this down? Do you write that rule down to remind yourself? Do you post it somewhere? What will be the concrete steps that you do it?
Oh, that's interesting. No,
Do
I
you
don't.
post it
I've
on your
never.
window on a big,
No, I've never
colorful?
done it that way. I just sort of think about it in my head and set that as the restriction for myself. And like fantasy novel, the whole series is about technology. But one of the rules I set for myself is to never use the word technology or any synonym of it, so that I have to then describe everything about this world in a way that does not explicitly invoke the word technology. And it ended up being very creatively interesting for myself.
Hmm. You were breaking up. You were talking about your fantasy series. I think there's a third volume coming out this year too.
That's right. Not this year, early next year. The third book in the series which is called The Veiled Throne. That's coming out in January of 2021.
How are we doing for time? You want to go to one more world, and then I think we have to wrap it up. Ken is very mindful of your time. Let's see.
You know, one thing I wanted to bring up too about like worlds like Sansar and
Go ahead.
Second Life is they're kind of like how the future is going to be when we don't have to care for our needs, basically food, shelter,
Yeah,
and things
yeah.
like that. Because what will we do then? You know, what
It,
will we work to benefit each other? Well, we'll
Mhm.
probably do something like Second Life.
yeah, you're right. It's in a post scarcity world where how do we remain connected? How do we share? How do we engage with each other?
Eva Paradise is engaging with us
Yeah.
by dancing.
Well,
This is brilliant. Matthew is making such a,
The
a
bankers.
great point, which I couldn't agree more of, in terms of sort of ecological, digital goods, of course, have a lower footprint on the environment. You're talking about meaningful work, and Eva is doing very meaningful calisthenics here for us. Thank you.
I love it.
Uh, this
And I
is
got
what.
something too, a little bit as well,
Yes,
touching
yes, little
on
robot, please.
like the coronavirus thing that's going on right now,
Oh,
and
is there? I didn't even hear
also
about that. I was in
and
Sansar.
and talking about for the future and stuff too. Just like, I mean, it's already happening today, is virtual meetings for corporate entities and for schools, universities. Like, I got the digital university here. You teach classes and have your meetings right here in VR space. You can be anywhere in the world, and you're eye to eye contact, face to face, and it's really powerful.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But let's be realistic, because two things: cost and bandwidth. We're not there yet. There are rural
It's
areas where
true.
the bandwidth is bad, and the
Yep.
cost to get started is still too high. It'll get better, hopefully. Let's go to one more world, and please just talk over me if you have questions. And Ken, please do talk over me. We do it all the time here in Germany. This is normal. It's a cultural prerequisite.
Polar bear, polar bear, polar bear.
Oh,
Oh, the polar bear is awesome.
oh, Zero,
This is
stop.
very nice work too. The animals.
Oh yeah, I love these.
Yeah, this is all Bagnari's and Matthew, and Matthew, I didn't want to cut you off because the
Here we
point that
go.
you made is so important, is very well put. I'm creating a portal to a little peaceful world where we can
That's a good place.
yeah,
Okay, let's go there.
here we go. And we have a few more minutes, folks. Oh, I have neglected the YouTube. Is this Jules has said we argue warmer empathy. What is Jules saying? We were just more polite about being awful to each other. Oops, I didn't see the context here in which Jules was saying that. Here we are. Now be careful with bringing up a little bit the audio. Oh yeah.
Oh,
See?
nice.
So this is a really soothing place, I think, that also facilitates conversation. This was built by Beverly. It's a woman from California, and as far as I know, she's self-taught. She works in government. She works in actually she works in emergency response in the Sacramento area. So I don't think we'll see her in world today, unfortunately. Okay, so let's a final question for Ken. If nobody has one, I'll give you 5 seconds to ask it because I have 50. And my teacher in German high school was always like, nobody wants to talk. Drax wants to talk. I know it. Um, so in closing, again, The Hidden Girl is out now, folks. Give it a try because reading fiction, I'm so convinced is such a powerful medium, more powerful than some audiovisual mediums. Not to replace them, but to conjure up these worlds in your mind and make it with your own colors um, is akin to making a Sansa world or a Second Life world, from scratch. But it's just wonderful. So Ken, thank you for coming, and I hope we'll see you again.
Thank you so much for having me, everyone, and Drax. It's really been such a great pleasure to come here and talk with everyone about books and visit around and just get a little sense of Zensar. It's awesome. So thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
And
All right.
next Wednesday we have we have Joanne McNeil, Wednesday 11 o'clock with her book Lurking. How we all became users. I think I don't actually know if this is the correct subtitle. I might be paraphrasing. And then Simon Sellers, who wrote a book called Applied Ballardianism. It's incredible. It's super wacky. He is obsessed with J.G. Ballard. It's a sort of a fictional memoir. Really cool stuff. So again, Ken, I was going to ask you what's the difference between writing a short story and writing epic fiction, but that will lead, to a 1 hour
That will be
answer.
an epic answer. So I do have to get out of here.
Okay. Bye,
Thank
Ken.
you.
Oh, his internet took him out.
The internet took him out. It wasn't it wasn't the lack of toilet paper at Costco, but let me get here. Oh yeah, here's the light.
Costco is out of toilet paper.
Well, I did see it on Twitter. So let me do a nice out here. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for participating. It was really awesome. Big shout out again to Bagnaria and Matthew from Full Spectrum 3D for making Ken's avatar. Ken was really, really super happy, and he's really into it. It was awesome to have an author, just like with Matt last week, have an author bring their own equipment. These authors actually do have VR. And yeah, next Wednesday, 11 o'clock, and then on the 26th, it's a weird time because it's in Australia. I mean, it's weird for Americans and Europeans. So it's in the morning. And in the middle of the night, I believe. You have to look it up. Events.sansar.com. That's it. Draxtor out. Thank you guys. Thank you Zero. Thank you Mayeki, Edgar Munn. I saw you somewhere. Eva Paradise, Space Sailor, Bluebell, and I am
Thank you for
out.
having me.
Goodbye. The Hidden Girl.
Hey, Drax.
Ken Liu. Goodbye.